Harry, how you doing, mate?
No, mate, you're right.
It's a pleasure to meet you. The face behind the voice. You never get to see your face, man, just your voice. But how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Yeah, how are you doing? Thanks for getting in touch and all that.
No, absolutely. Do you know what? You're doing good stuff. So it's been quite fun listening to like the old stories from back in the day and people's perspectives on it. And I guess like it's just great to sort of take a trip down memory lane, I guess, and talk a bit about the time and like the music and the people. It was a really good time. So how's it all going with it? It seems like it's going pretty well. A lot of great guests.
Yeah, it's going all right. Just trying to stagger out the main episodes a bit so we can expand the life of it a little bit. But
Yeah, got it. Nice.
no, it's pretty happy with it. Yeah, it's going all right.
That's
It's
it.
good little hobby.
Good stuff.
What about you? Where are you based?
I'm actually currently I live out in Portugal, sort of not far from Lisbon. So I
Ah,
moved out
nice
here.
one.
Yeah, I moved out here for like 3.5 years ago. But I mean, I've spent most of my life in London. I lived in LA for a year, sort of 2016. But then yeah, moved out here just after the pandemic actually. I got a bit of Portuguese heritage, but yeah, it's a great place to live. A lot of interesting people here, a lot of music people starting to move here as well. So it's and I come into London every couple of times a month or once a month at least.
Ah, okay.
I've got a lot of clients there still. So yeah, I don't miss London, but I tell you what, I mean, I think without London, wouldn't have a career or wouldn't have, sort of delved into music the way I would have done. Do you know what I mean? It was such an amazing city for that. And, owe a lot to it in that sense. So I always got huge respect for it. And even though I don't want to live there anymore, it's definitely formed me as a person. You know what I mean? So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's get into it then. Like how do you get to the point of being a Rakes manager? What's the
Oh,
build up to that?
I
Where are you
mean,
from originally, out of interest?
well, I'm from South London, from
Okay.
Streatham originally. Yeah. So I guess like, yeah, always into music, bands and playing in bands and fundamentally failing in that. I was a drummer, never really got anywhere in that respect, to the delight of the Rakes and every other band I've ever managed or musician I've ever managed, like to hold that against me. But yeah, I mean, I guess I first met the Rakes randomly. I first met the Rakes when I was at university. I met them at Brighton Uni. And, I came from living in Streatham in South London, which felt more suburban than, than being in the city, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? I was kind of like closer to Croydon than I was to the West End, and would probably spend more time in Croydon than the West End. So you kind of lived a bit of a suburban existence, really. And with that come the people that you sort of knock about with and live. So I guess going to university was a bit of an eye opener for me, and I'm meeting quite a lot of interesting people down in Brighton. This was in like the mid 90s. And I get the first couple of people I really sort of started to hang out with that were different to a lot of the friends I did have at the time were Jamie and Alan from the Rakes. They were kind of like interesting characters that were already down there for a year before me. And I'm just really cool guys. We sort of hung out a lot. We used to go to all the usual sort of haunts down in Brighton, sort of indie clubs and whatnot. And yeah, I guess that was my sort of first experience of meeting them. And yeah, we stayed friends ever since. And I moved back to London. Some of them stayed down in Brighton. And then we sort of, I guess, stayed in touch and kind of reconvened again. I think a few years later, I mean, I was kind of working in advertising, sort of hating my life. Like 26, I was like, I could see the fucking future, and it was not where I wanted it to be. And I've been sort of like trying to get out of that to find ways into music, and it wasn't really happening. And Jamie and Alan, I think Jamie was working in a clothes shop at the time. Alan was, I think, didn't really see Alan an awful lot after that, but I was still more in touch with Jamie. And yeah, I guess had sort of started to do something musically. Um, but for me, it was, yeah, I think I was kind of like working out what to do around 26, and I was going to go back to university to do photography. That was something I was kind of into at the time, randomly, and you know, I started taking sort of photos of bands around London. You know, I was sort of getting into as many gigs as I could, like Libertines, sort of Kings of Leon, people like that. I was just trying to work my way around it and be
Was that
part
quite
be
easy to
part of.
do out of interest? You were able
Really, I
to.
mean, yeah, but a little bit. I guess we kind of. It's funny. We sort of knew it was kind of weird back then. We sort of knew a few people, not a lot of people, but a few people, and being able to sort of get on the guest list and then somehow sort of try to blag a photo past by emailing people. So it was. But don't get me wrong, I was definitely not a Roger Sargent. I definitely aspired, definitely like what he was doing, and tried to aspire to be a bit like that for a very brief period, purely off the back of not wanting to sort of work in what I was doing, just to be in music. And
You must have some
anyway,
good photos there from back in the day,
do
though.
you know, I've got a few. I actually took the first Rakes press photos, actually,
Oh, yes.
which sort of appear on the back of their first single. That was actually, yeah, I actually did that. But but yeah, I guess, like, it was that was my way. My in my head was way out of it. So anyway, to cut a long story short, the Rakes did their first gig, and Jamie said we're playing a show at the garage upstairs at the garage. I was like, look, I'll come down and take some photos, because I was, just wanting to be part of it, and just get as many shots, get as many opportunities to take photos as I could at the time, and it seemed quite fun. And I sort of watched the show, and I was like, this is fucking great. These guys are like, I mean, it's like beautifully chaotic. Do you know what I mean? Like, they looked they looked amazing. They sounded like pretty shitty, but like there was a sort of energy about them. And I sort of just kind of said, look, after the show, I said, look, let me help you out, in some way or form. I don't know how. I kind of knew a couple of people. My mate Hamish McBain, who ended up becoming the sort of, I think, was associate editor of the NME, or deputy editor of the NME. Had various roles in music journalism. He was a good friend of mine at the time, and he could see the sort of see the sort of the value in what they were doing. And so I think at first he wanted to help. We were planning to do it together, but he ended up getting too busy with what he was doing, and I just kind of carried the mantle. So yeah, saw their first show, said, let me help you out, and it went from there, really. um you know I there was no rule book basically back then. It was really like, how can we get to the next stage. It was about helping them book shows, and then we need, that was the first step. Get hitting up the Bull and Gate, hitting up the Barfly, trying to get them gigs around London, and just trying to make that next step all the time. After every step, moving to the next one, trying to move to the next one. So it was amazing. It was like, you were, just trying to for me, it was like getting out of what I had to do my day job. So I was doing that kind of part time whilst working in advertising, selling advertising, sort of killing myself every day, and just, you know not doing an awful lot of work in my day job, and just spending all my time doing that, to the detriment of, like, my work at my proper job, where people would be like, what the fuck are you doing, Phil? Like, where are you? Do you know what I mean? So it was fun. It was really fun. Um, yeah. So that's how it came
Yeah.
about.
Yes. And like, how proactive do you have to be? Is it all about getting gigs? Like, what else are we trying to
Well, I
do?
mean, I think that, look, but it was such a different time. It was
Yeah.
such a different time back then. I mean, you sort of have a think about what you need to the skill set you need as a manager now, and how quickly the music industry changes, and what you have to know. Back then, it was totally different. There was, to a degree, a bit of a, well, certainly in the UK, there was a little bit of a, I would say, a rule book, but, like, for bands, it was like, you would try to make your first foray into sort of the NME, try and get a great single review, get a live review, then try and get a feature, then try and get on one of their tours, and then, you know, somehow get a deal. Do you know what I mean? And then go from there. There was these kind of steps, and NME was, for that kind of music anyway, was paramount. you had to get their support. If you didn't get their support, you were pretty screwed. Do you know what I mean? Especially a band like the Rakes. Um, so it was really interesting in that sense. And I think the first thing the guys got was like a single review for their first single 22 gram job, which Leonie Cooper, who was still a great journalist. She covered it, and we thought we made it. That when we got that, we were just like over the moon, sort of high fiving, and couldn't really believe it. But as I say, it was like there was a process. It was like getting shows. It was like trying to kind of record a demo, get a single deal. And the first single we put out, the 22 gram job record, was the second release, I think, on Transcopic, which then became Transgressive Records. So it was like, I think the first one they put out was Block Party, She's Hearing Voices, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was 22 gram job by the Rakes. So it was a really sort of great time for music in London. And it was really exciting. We sort of, I don't know, to actually feel like you could, I don't know, sort of affect culture. And I think then you kind of could a little bit in your own little world. Now you've got you're exposed to so much noise. You're competing. If you're in a band now, you're competing with everyone on their who are following you on their phone. There's so many artists that you're being bombarded with so much noise. Whereas then it wasn't like that. You didn't have that noise going on around you. So it was kind of easy to, well, it felt easier to sort of somehow get your way into the NME and get people to sort of hear your music in that sense. Okay, maybe not hear your music as easily as you can now, but like maybe to affect culture. I'm
Yeah,
making
it's like
sense.
it's like there's like a filter, wasn't there? Enemy, like a filter of what
Mm,
people should be listened into, kind of thing,
precisely.
or
Yeah.
recommendations. Whereas now, like you say, it's just so
It's
much of it.
it's noise. Yeah, there's this really hard to cut through, and almost impossible. So yeah, I'm kind of losing my sort of chain here, but like, look, back to the point about being a manager. You didn't have to yeah, like back then there wasn't as many skills that you need to know or need to know about as much then, because it was a little bit easier, I guess. Not as much to take on board per se. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it was like you said, there wasn't a rule book type thing with that scene, so you didn't feel like an imposter type thing.
Yeah. Um, we were quite lucky because I guess there's a lot of people, you know, unbeknown to us, I guess, or unbeknown to me anyway. I mean, obviously, kind of, prior to the Rakes, and probably one of the reasons they got sort of influenced by, and I think the same with the Libertines, were influenced by sort of the Strokes, and you could tell there was that, whether they admit it or not, I'm sure there was that influence for them to an extent, and the British bands being able to do that, and there was a whole host of people and a whole host of exciting bands existing on our doorstep and in our vicinity that you probably didn't know about until you started doing shows, and then you started meeting them, started connecting with them, and started working out what that what the environment looked like, sort of, who else is in your ecosystem, so to speak. It was amazing. Maximo Park, Block Party, you know, just to just two for starters, which were incredible, great bands. Then there was bands like the Others and the Paddingtons, of course, and Art Brut, etc. And it all kind of, and the Libertines as well, and it all came together in such a nice sort of marketable um, product for someone like the NME, which helped us, even though I guess the band probably didn't feel very affiliated with that. you know, it definitely helped to create a buzz and to kind of move them on to the next level, which we, I guess they had to probably were quite thankful for, if not at the time, definitely sort of post, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, from what I remember when speaking to Matt and Lassa, they said they didn't feel massively part of a scene, But was it different? Different for you? Were you having to quite do a bit more networking than they would type
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, 100%. I mean, look, it was you had to, yeah, it was use that as an advantage, and it kind of was because it meant, I remember the article that, I mean, we all kind of all congregated. I remember there was Janine Warren was our press officer at the time. She was at a company called Coalition, and she did Block Party. She also did PR or was part of PR for the Strokes and Franz. And when we got her on board, things really started to move for us. I remember her coming to a show that we were played in a pub in Islington, and to get her on board was a massive thing for the Rakes. And like when we did, things started to really move for them in terms of having that sort of connect with the NME and press in general. And
Is that
so
before you get signed then, or is that after you get
yeah, it was
signed?
before. This is all
Oh,
before.
right.
Look, the Rakes did not get took ages to get. They didn't, it wasn't a simple thing. No one would take a chance of them. Block Party got signed to Wichita. We were one of the last ones to get out of that sort of first wave, like Maximo Park, Block Party. And the Rakes were like one of the last ones to get signed. So, it
How
was
many
tough.
years? Sorry, how many years of work are we talking before they get signed?
I
From
think
your
we,
point of
we
view.
spent like a couple. You know what? I think it was probably about sort of 18 months, maybe even 2 years. From my maybe 18 months from my involvement anyway, of me being working with them. But when I say work, we're all friends. It was like it, not even in the professional sense. We're all like just sort of making up as we went along. But yeah, like it took a while. And as I say, sort of getting these kind of looks in NME at the time. Remember the sort of London scene feature. We all went down to Buckingham Palace, and I was like, Pete, Baby Shambles, Friendly Fires, the Rakes, Neil's Children, and Block Pie, maybe Block Pie. I can't remember if they were there. Art Brut were definitely there. Things like that really, really helped. To being affiliated to that, to something, whatever this London thing was, it was actually quite useful. Um, but and that goes into the point about Janine, the PR, it was so important to get that. I remember on our second single, Strasbourg, which we signed to a label called City Rockers at the time, which, not necessarily I guess, an indie label, but, it was another sort of independent single we had to do to kind of move up the ladder. And it was a great one. We ended up, Janine and the band and we came up with this idea of, because you had to get into the NME. It was so important. You had to kind of create a moment, every time you put something out. So we ended up sort of hiring a fucking London bus and doing a sort of trip down to Brighton and putting a show on at one of the clubs in Brighton with Neil's Children. Actually, they joined us on it, and then the NME came along and all the band on it. Sort of London day out to Brighton, but the NME covered it in their live section. It was like a double page feature, and it was like, this is great. Do you know what I mean? To say you could, it was kind of easy to affect these. Not easy, but like it was obtainable to kind of to come up with these kind of ideas, and then these to be sort of picked up by young music lovers who are NME readers who wanted to digest this kind of stuff. It was easy, it was done. You could do it quite not easily, but like it was obtainable. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I messaged Matt before he came on for any stories or anything. See what he had to say, and he said this. He put, "Well, Phil was perfect for us, as he was as much of a character as the rest of us. He might disagree, but I think his whole management playbook in the early days basically came from watching Led Zepp documentaries and This Is Spinal Tap, which worked."
I mean,
And then he mentions the Buster Brighton for NME feature was his idea. I think top work. Maybe ask him what he thought. Maybe ask him when he thought things had gone professional with the Rakes, if ever.
yeah, do you know what, man? Yeah, I think that we were all kind of, as I say, working out as we went along. And I think when you look back, like the Rakes sort of ended up selling out Brits and Academy, which is a no mean feat. And you know,
Yeah, it's
their album,
massive. Yeah.
the album Capture release was, in my opinion, was an absolute classic. And you know, did we ever get fully professional? I think we did or try to, but we were like four or five mates. Do you know what I mean? I had to think if they were freaky, so I don't know what happened. My brain went a bit weird. We were mates, sort of just sort of going on this journey. You know what I mean? And it had its ups and downs, but we actually had some great highlights. We created a record, which in my opinion is one of the better records out from that era. You know, um, Obviously Paul Epworth being an incredible producer at the time, being part of it, which sometimes bends my head. When I think about how the Rakes managed to sort of work with someone like Paul. You know, when you look back on it, I guess at the time he was someone who was fresh and young and exciting. It was hanging around the same sort of places as the Rakes, and was sort of working with sort of peers of theirs. But yeah, I mean, it was. I think for one moment, it was like it was the coolest thing. Do you know what I mean? It captured some sort of zeitgeist to a very small amount of time. So yeah, I mean, like professional, maybe not so much, but like I think when you look back on it, it was pretty sick. As far, I think we maybe took it as far as we probably could have. But they might disagree with that. But I don't know. I would say so.
Yeah, fair enough. And in terms of like the songs, did they always have that set of songs to begin with, so you knew what you're working with, or did you have to encourage them to write more, or would you get involved in any of that?
Nah, I mean, I think I think it's safe to say they probably weren't the most like prolific writers. Like having done this for a long time, you meet people that are just crazy productive in that sense. But what they churned out was, I think, was pretty special at times. Some records in there which definitely I think stand up. And they seem to like always you know get there, even though it's a struggle. I don't think it came easy. There's a lot of different opinions. You had Alan's sort of style. You had Matthew, um, but that kind of cocktail of characters definitely created like a special thing, especially when you think about like a song like 22 Grand Job, or you think about Retreat, or even on Capture Release, like songs like sort of Work, Pub Club Sleep, which to me that's one of the best songs I've ever written. And like I know it might sound a bit, having been there and being part of it or being in the middle of it, like, I think that's a probably underrated track of that era. It's like I
Not
think it's like
playing.
prime squeeze. Do you know what I mean? It's you know great songwriting. I mean it's incredible. So like I think they could get themselves out of it and create some moments. I think it got difficult towards I think the second record sort of. I think that's when it sort of became hard.
Yeah, I suppose it's natural that the dynamic could change at that point.
Yeah, a little bit, but you know what? I don't know what the guys will say to this, but I think maybe they were such misfits. You know what I mean? They're just such a like band of like interesting characters that shouldn't. I don't know. Maybe probably wouldn't in any other sort of time formed a band, and like they were always, and also always taking a piss as well. They're massive piss takers, and like in a sense, in a humorous way, not in a horrible way, but they would, they took themselves seriously, but then they didn't take themselves seriously. If you can do both, um,
But yeah, but self-awareness, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I think, I think they probably sort of struggled a little bit with the second record, but then you had some really great records and really great songs in there, like Tom Cruise Cries and the last track of the album, which is completely sort of I've completely blanked on it. Leave the city and come home, I think, which
Yeah, it's
again is
brilliant,
a
yeah.
amazing track. So they had their moments, but I guess if we were all a bit more experienced now, is there a way? Would there be a different way to approach it? But maybe not. And that's the beauty of it. It's so fucking DIY, and so you don't find bands like that now. they're thinking about too many other things like TikTok, you know, their social media numbers and Instagram, and like it's that would a band like the Rakes probably would never exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a
I mean,
bit.
how different would your job be now if you're doing it now?
So,
Would it be like a lot busier? Would you have to be doing a lot
well, I
more
mean,
as a manager now? Yeah.
well, I mean, look, you know, you have to
All the
see.
content type thing, yeah.
Oh my God! I mean, yeah, it's a completely different kettle of fish, and the Rakes would probably not have even attempted to form a band now if they were that age now doing it now. I mean, it'd be completely different kettle of fish. What
Yeah.
you know that you know, social media, content generation, understanding how to get the best out of TikTok. I mean, I can't. It's
The
just
algorithm.
mad. Yeah, the alg exactly. You know, the music moves so quickly, and I think I saw a little clip from your, you know, clip from Connor McNichols or McNicholas. Completely got
Ridiculous, yeah.
understand exactly. Just talking about, you know, great. Talking, obviously, him being in this sort of Eye of the Storm, and you know, editor of NME at the time, and yeah, just how things kind of started to change at that point. You know, in terms of him knowing that, understand that NME was probably on a sort of, you know, downwards trajectory in the way in which sort of the, you know, the youth and the kids were sort of communicating and translating, and how culture and, you know, trends would move so quickly and fizzle out really quickly, you know. And that's just even more now, you know, with all the platforms that we deal with, and the way in which the kids sort of communicate and consume. So I mean, back then it was a little bit easier, and as I say, you felt like you could really affect culture quite easily. I don't know, easily, but I keep saying that, not easily, but easily. Yeah, but you could really make a difference, which was interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And like, I think Matt and Lassa both said, yeah, they were quite a boozy band. Was that something you got on board with?
Yeah, probably at the time. Like, yeah, I mean, look, you know, as I say, you sort of mid-20s in London, you know, you spent a lot of time going out. There was none of this. Again, you didn't have Instagram, you didn't have people filming you or worrying about, like, you know, what you would be doing would be up on a social media, on someone's social media channel the next day, or worried about saying something inappropriate. Do you know what I mean? That was what it was like, you know, and it was, yeah. I think we're that kind of generation, I guess, that drank a lot and everything else, you know, part of the part of it, I guess. And yeah, the band definitely had a drink, and I think, like, probably, you know, I'm Paul quite chilled now, but I think, you know, it's definitely, it fueled a lot of the early tours that we did, and you know, I guess, like, yeah, probably the sort of friendship manager kind of line was kind of crossed, you know. I guess you know, so it was quite blurry, and I think a lot of people who get into the music business that way don't necessarily stick about that long, if when they get into that way, because something will eventually go wrong, and they end up getting sacked, or, you know, luckily for me, I didn't. I'm still here doing the job, which is crazy, but you know, 20 years later, as it were. But yeah, it was you know, there was, I mean, I remember a trip to Amsterdam, which was pretty fucking crazy, to be honest. Like, the guy, yeah, I remember London Calling, which was a really incredible festival, which would happen biannually in Amsterdam, and they would just invite all the sort of cool London or UK bands. It was called London Calling, but it wasn't sort of solely UK, London centric. And, you know, you would, that was always one of the things you wanted to get. You know, like, we got, you know, early doors, it was like, oh, it'd be great to go to Amsterdam and play London Calling, because, you know, Block Pie did it, or the Subways did it, or Baby Shambles did it. And I remember on the eve of us going, I remember we had a tour manager, driver called Sean. He's a really cool guy from Kentish Town. And he was due to pick the guys up to take them to Amsterdam to jump on the ferry that day. I think he called me up and he was like, oh, I can't make it, mate. Why is that? I was like, why? He's like, oh, I've just delivered my wife's babe, I've just delivered my son this morning. My wife gave birth. It was this week, a week early. And I was like, all right, fair enough. Do you know what I mean? So I just scrabble around and find someone else. He managed to find this other guy called Lowell, who was an interesting guitar tech that we ended up keeping for a long time. Absolute crackers. He drove us to Amsterdam, and then one point we sort of, it was quite late, and we ended up sort of, we kind of missed the turning and sort of jolted the minibus, and we span off the motorway at like
Wow.
2 a.m, which was pretty terrifying. Yeah, and you think of these things that was going on, it's just like you would not do this now. Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't sort of just randomly bring in some guy to sort of tour manage you who you didn't really know. And he was a great guy. So, apart from that little moment, and then we ended up doing the show, and it was pretty funny. And then we ended up sort of getting not everyone, but it definitely got a little bit messy. I think it was at the time when mushrooms were a little bit easy to come by in Amsterdam.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Anyway, it just descended into a bit of chaos as you do, and it was documented, but I don't think it ended up seeing the light of day.
Oh, well, guitar video.
Something like that. But rightly so, because probably one for the history books. But yeah, as I say, it just it was just fun times. Do you know what I mean? We were all friends trying to, sort of going on a journey, and as I say, apart from the spinning off the motorway part, which I don't condone. It all went quite smoothly most of the time.
Yeah, yeah. So what was typically on a Rakes rider then?
Oh man, do I
Was it
there's a
just
lot of,
beer basically?
yeah, pretty much. I'm pretty sure it was just beer. Yeah, pretty much. Sort of the vegetarian, vegan, sort of approved beer for Alan for sure. I'm not sure what the drink of choice was for Lasser and those guys. Probably vodka. They drank a lot, but I think a lot of the bands did then.
Yeah,
So
of course, yeah.
that's part and parcel of it,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
And
Um,
how about it was there like a standout moment when they got signed? Can you remember that? Or
yeah,
was
well,
it like more of a build up to that?
no,
So
no. I mean, I think it was so how it went was like we did two singles. We did 22 grand job, you know, cult status sort of secured to a degree. We then did Strasbourg, which again sort of helped it move on a bit more. Then we did Retreat, which was that was the first thing that Paul Epworth produced. And I remember hearing that. I was like, this is incredible. This is like, he made the rake sound 3D. You know what I mean? Anyway, and that's what got people really interested in the band. I
so
remember
how are
in
you
that.
getting Paul Ep? Is that through like just like a one-off single
No,
deal?
no, no, I mean, just literally, it was like I think Jamie knew him from like Old Street, and he got talking to him. And at the time, I think he was doing the Block Party record, and I just like we just sort of spoke to he had a manager called Annette at the time, the girl called Annette, who was really sweet, and like we ended up just calling her up and being like, look, you're actually working with the guys. I mean, this was before Paul was where he is now. Like it's
Yeah, I
like,
know, yeah.
but he did the Futures
He's
record,
in
and
demand, wasn't he,
he
that
was in
time?
demand, and and he wanted to get into it and get behind it. And we already had a bit of people sniffing around the band, but like no one ever wanted to take the jump on them because they were just a bit chaotic. But Retreat definitely created that moment. I remember Imran Ahmed at the NME sort of calling up about it and going, that's fucking amazing what you've done there. That track's incredible. That's something, it's definitely something special. And I remember them, I think just before that, the only person that put their neck out for the band was a guy called David Donald at Warner Chapel, and he was a person that kind of gave them a shot by giving them some money for us to do a publishing deal. This was before we did a record deal, so we did those two singles. I think David then kind of liked what he saw and was willing to kind of sign these things for maniacs, basically, and me as a manager, and basically invested a fair chunk of money just to sign the guy's publishing so we could keep doing what we were doing and to be able to kind of pay for Paul to do a record and to kind of keep it moving. So that was the first time we kind of started to start make our way.
So
And
what sorry, 'cause just like an outsider type thing.
mm,
So publishing deal, that means they're they essentially own the music at
the
that point.
publishing, yeah, the publishing rights. So there's two main rights in music, really. It's the master rights and the publishing, the written rights. And so that was, I think most people go after try to do a deal for both of those things, the master's side being the records and the written side being the publishing. So sometimes you could at the time, you would sometimes get a publishing deal before a record deal to keep you moving, because sometimes the record companies didn't see the worth in what you were doing at the time. So you had to kind of keep pushing forward. So David Donald signed the band. He was at Warner's after the band's second single, I think.
Oh, okay.
Fell in love with them and was up for it. And then
so if a company comes in wanting to use it for an advert, is that down to him?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, the department in there might send the music out. Their sync department might send the music out to an agency who choose music for adverts, for example. But they're basically exploiting the rights that they've obtained. So
yeah.
But I mean, that's the sort of nuts and bolts side of it. But obviously, from our point of view, it's like someone who's willing to give the band some money.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Like,
Just
let's go. Do you know what I mean? So that was when it first started, and that was when I actually left my job. So I was doing, working I was working a day job like Jimmy from Quadrophenia, and then I remember going in and just being like, "We signed a publishing deal. I'm actually leaving now. See you later." Take your franking machine and your typewriter or whatever, shove up the ass. Basically, it was amazing. And then
so that's a huge moment for you as well as the band, then obviously.
Yeah, exactly. So it just bit of money in their pocket, and then we did Retreat. We signed that. We ended up doing that with Moshi, who subsequently before that did Banquet by Block Party.
Oh, right. Okay. It's
So
a bit of a theme, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's how it works. Anyway, and then and then basically V2 Records decided to sign the band. They put their hand up and went, you know what, we'll take it. We'll have a go on this. We'll take a chance. And it wasn't. I think the Rakes were just they were cool, but at the time people didn't think they had what it took. I don't think. Yeah, bands like Kaisers. The Kaisers were a big one. I think they were that band like James, who I work with now, who still manages the Kaiser Chiefs. I mean, they were like always that band that like were smashing it. Do you know what I mean? Like radio, fucking.
They really crossed over, didn't they?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I guess for bands like the Rays, looked at them and were like, oh, fucking hell, how are we going to get to that point? Bloody Kaiser Chiefs. So I guess V2 took a little punt on us. A guy called Malcolm Dunbar, who's passed away recently. He was great. Sort of gruff Scottish guy, who was quite funny. Insisted on sort of speeding up all the singles by a certain percent without telling the band.
Without telling them.
Well, he did, but like Retreat was like, we should very speed that, put up a little notch, just to get it going at the idiot. It's quite funny. He was a real character. Like,
well, did that actually happen? Did
yeah,
he speed it up?
He wanted to. I mean, you wouldn't notice it
to
the sort of average person. So yeah, and we met some great people, and it was same people that V2 had at the time. They had like Paul Weller, who being a massive Jam fan was quite crazy. I remember taking him to see the Rakes at Shepherd's Empire, which was pretty, say what you will. I mean, if you're into the Jam when you're a bit younger and you meet Paul Weller and he's watching your band, the band that not my band, sorry, watching your band that you're managing and being part of, and you're just like, you've made it, man. You're working in fucking advertising for like 6 years, then you're sitting there watching the bands with Paul Weller, who's going, hey, they're all right. Like, yeah, amazing.
yeah. So what does that deal look like then? Was it like a multi-album deal?
Usually like, yeah, exactly. Like a couple of, probably 5, it would be 4 or 5 records. But after the first record, they have an option to take the next one on, and then so on and so forth. So we actually managed to do 3.
It's decent effort though.
Which is decent effort, yeah. Decent effort, and some great, some great people that work. There's a guy called Jason Rackham who's still in music. He was really instrumental, and marketing guy sort of helped us, helped me a lot, and helped the guys get to where they wanted to get to, and some funny A&R people that the band just took the piss out of relentlessly. But yeah,
Yeah.
good times.
And like you mentioned, the money with the publishing, was it a similar thing with the record deal? Was it like an advance?
Yeah, you just get like a little advance, and and they pay for recording, or the advances, or you have to pay for the recording with your advance as well.
Ah, okay.
But yeah, out of that advance. But yeah,
Are you
so
essentially paying, is it like you're paying that back though through record sales?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
Yeah.
you recoup your yeah, you have to recoup your advance through the sales of your records and the streams of your records, and then after that, once you recoup, you get paid. So put it this way, the Rakes didn't recoup, unfortunately for them. But live was so good for them. They did some great shows, and they were a great touring band. And it was had some toured everywhere, toured Japan, went to Japan, went to America a few times, South America, um, yeah, I mean all over, which is
Yeah.
nuts. A band like the Rakes, sort of like 3 years ago you're like in some shitty pub in Camden, and then you're like in LA, sort of playing in some sort of weird party or hanging out with Steve Aoki, the
Oh yeah.
DJ.
Yeah, he had a bit of like an input in the scene, didn't
Yeah, yeah. So he, he had a record label called Dimac. He loved, he signed Block Party. And he actually signed the Rakes randomly. So it's kind of crazy when you think of Steve Aoki as now. He's like one of the biggest EDM DJs, or was one of the biggest EDM DJs in the world. Um, a megastar in that world. And Steve was like obsessed with Block Party and the Rakes. I mean, the band slept in his office for like all the time they were in LA.
he?
Steve was so enthusiastic about it. It was so weird. Then you see him go on to kind of do what he does now. So many stories like that. Sort of meeting people like that. And I remember going to LA. I remember when the bands first went out there. William Morris, who were one of the big agencies, wanted to sign them, or ended up becoming their agency in America, which is completely nuts. And William Morris is like a huge, or what a huge kind of organization that do huge actors in America, and like, huge bands. And a guy called Kurt Summer, who was, he was actually the Killer's agent, and he went on to be, and he still is, I think, Adele's agent. And he was like, him and his partner at the time were just chasing us around LA, like calling me up all the time, going, "Hey, we wanna be the Rick's agent. These guys are great," And it's like, are you mental? What planet are you fucking on? We didn't really sort of do too much in the US after that. We did Coachella, which was quite interesting, but not to many people. I'd be brutally honest, but we still had some moments, and yeah, I think they actually sent. I think William Morris sent a rake to our office, to the management office in London. They sent a rake saying, "We really want to represent you guys. Here's a rake, a garden rake." So it's not exactly what the name.
Off the wall, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's strange. Anyway, there you
Did you
go.
get any like TV opportunities in America? I guess that's a big thing, isn't it?
Do you know what? I actually can't remember. If I'm honest with you, I'm thinking back. I think we might have done. I mean, the UK, we definitely did. In the US, I mean, Jamie or the guys or Matt might be able to confirm, but I cannot remember if we did or not. It was that long ago,
Yeah.
and it doesn't stand out. I remember, going to see New York for CMJ, which was at a time was a real big thing, and sort of early 2000, 2005, 2006, feeling like we're gonna fucking take over America. That's how you felt.
Mm.
You were so not deluded, but so like sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of enthusiastic and like, sort of. I think deluded is the right word actually. You
You
felt
like
you were going
riding
to
the
change the
waves type
world, man.
thing, yeah.
Exactly, man. That was how it was back then. You like we're going to New York. We're gonna smash it, and then from there on we're gonna go to LA. We're gonna go and do this. We're gonna do that. It was crazy. That's how you felt.
They must be more so for you though, because you're seeing the band and seeing how good they are. So it
Mm.
must like maybe more for you thinking, well, there's no reason why they can't kind of take things by storm. Whereas the band themselves might have been a bit more
Uh,
skeptical. But
yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I think Jamie was always very ambitious, like the bass player, and like
fair enough.
he's a manager now, and like he's always had that
Oh,
mentality.
is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he manages some great people. You know, Reggie Snow and loads of loads of cool people. He's a great guy, and like yeah, yeah, like I don't know whether I think there was always probably limitations with the Rakes, like just sonically, and they'll probably admit that as well. But I don't think that stopped you dreaming. Do you know what I mean? And I think,
Yeah.
as I say, especially back then, it was different. As you know, you couldn't see how, how can I put it? Your world was fundamentally the UK, and America was this thing, and going into Europe and doing the things you did live was kind of easy enough. You weren't bombarded by figures and stats of how well records are doing in America at your fingertips. You can't go on, you can go on Spotify and see that actually a big record in America streams billions, whereas a big record in the UK probably wouldn't do anywhere near that amount. So you see the differentiation between the size of the markets. Now you see that. Back then you didn't. So you were just wide eyed. You just felt like you could do anything, and you weren't sort of bombarded down by numbers and the size of it all. So it was much more for everything felt much more obtainable. It's a strange thing. It's a strange thing to kind of explain. Um, so yeah, that was kind of that was part of it. But yeah, I think the band could probably look, we could have probably done better in certain scenarios if we went back in time and thought about it. But in general, it was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, yeah.
A beautiful thing.
And were V2 quite relaxed with you, like,
Um,
or were they putting targets on you or anything?
yeah, I mean, we didn't sign for a huge amount of money, so I think we had a bit of leeway comparatively to a lot of bands that maybe at the time you know, then signed to majors because, the Libertines and Baby Shams and Block Parties as well were kind of doing really well. And so I guess you had this slew of major record companies then signing bands like that because that's what the radio were playing. That's what Zane Lowe was playing. So therefore, they would go and sign those bands for a lot of money, and then the pressures for them would be much higher. A lot of them wouldn't even get a record out. They'll be drops before they even got to that point. Tons of those bands. But I think with the Rakes, we signed a quite sensible deal. And I think at the end of it, we did a lot. They kind of came out without losing money themselves. They sort of, had a publishing deal, and I think things worked out. But yeah, um, it, there was always pressures, but not so much that compared to a lot of the other bands that came afterwards, who were signed to majors for sure. They definitely probably had a lot more pressures up upon them. You know,
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
ask me to name any, but I mean, maybe like I don't know, there's a yeah, can't pull the names from the top of my head now.
No, I think like even I think the Paddingtons were signed to a major label.
Yeah, I'm not sure who they signed to
It
actually.
was what is Alan McGee's
Oh, okay.
Pop
Uh,
Tones, where they were linked with what
yeah,
was it
Mercury,
Warner? Oh, Mercury,
Mercury. I
sorry.
think. Yeah, I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure it might have been that. But I'm thinking more. I don't know, bands that were signed. Yeah, I don't know, like Good Shoes or Good Books, bands like that came sort of roughly around the same time. But then
Yeah, like the Arctic
there was
Monkeys era,
others.
maybe.
There
Yeah,
was there were others. There were others.
yeah.
I struggled a bit. But yeah,
Was it like so? There wasn't like a bidding war with for the Rakes and
certainly not. No, there
makes
wasn't
things
really.
easier, I suppose.
No, there wasn't. Oh no, I tell a lie. There was. It was because I don't know if you know a label now called Because Music. Um, so there was one party that were definitely there was one label that were quite keen at the time because Music are now a really established record label and very very yeah, very established, got some incredible artists. And I remember I think via the guy that put out our record Strasbourg City Rockers, he took at the time then took the band to this guy called Emmanuel de Bretel, who is a very, very, very successful music executive from France who's just and then started this label Because, which now exists, and Christine and the Queens and all sorts of people like that. and he wanted to sign the band. I went along to the meeting, just whatever, completely nonchalant, really. I think the guys are really sort of quite into the VT thing, I think at the time. And I remember having this meeting with Emmanuel before a show, and Phil from City Rockers before the show in Oxford. And I think we ended up, just for whatever reason, we decided we wanted to go with V2. And Emmanuel at the Brutal was not fucking happy.
Really?
He was not happy. And I think, these guys, I mean, the bloody manager, he doesn't know what he's doing. I cannot believe it. I sang fucking Daft Punk, you know. It's just like, honestly, just, yeah, things like that.
Yeah. That's it.
And the guys definitely decided, we all collectively decided that was the thing to do. But maybe it might have been different if Emmanuel de Brutal had signed the Rakes. It might have been a different proposition. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah,
But you
fair.
weren't phased by those sort of things when I guess now you probably a different work, go at it a different way. But back then it was just like fucking snotty 27-year-old, like just whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's quite funny.
Yeah. And does like your job become easy once the band are signed? Is it a bit more
No,
straightforward
not
or
really.
not?
No, no, certainly not now. But no, because there's so many more factors, so many more people involved, so many more things you've got to think about, so many more outside noises and outside opinions on what you should be putting out, what you should do, what records you should do, what the Radio One think, will Zane Lowe play it? I think the big, prime example, after Retreat, the band were on a real trajectory like that, and we didn't have a lot, we didn't have all our music up our sleeve, to capitalize on that. And I seem to remember we needed to write a new single, and work was that. And that was a record that came out. That was a record that came out before the album, and I think there was a lot of deliberation about, was it good enough? Should we do it? Should we not? And we put it out, and Zayn didn't get behind it in the same way as he did with Retreat. So therefore, it kind of going into the album was such an important time, and it didn't really hit home as much as Retreat did. So therefore, and those decisions like that, choices like that. Not saying that was my decision or the label decision or whatever, but it becomes much more strategic, and you needed to have having that experience would obviously help a lot. It helps a lot having people around you to help with that. But it was things like that, little kind of sort of margins, decisions that you make that could have a bit of an impact on how a record progresses and how it charts, for example. So yeah, there's a lot of noises. It became a lot harder for sure. But I think looking back, when you look at the results of what that record did and like how it was received, and that, just as an example, I think I think we can be happy with it.
Yeah. And then there's a story about 22 Grand Job where it's based on Alan going for a job that he didn't get.
Yeah,
Were you hoping he didn't get the job at the time? Or was it
yeah. I mean, it was
before?
a definitely. I think getting, as I say, I think getting that money from David Donald and the publishing deal basically, really sort of put everyone in that mindset, like, okay, we're going to do this properly now. We've actually got some money. I Alan might have still been doing a bit of work here and there, afterwards. I can't say for sure. Can't actually remember. But as I say, that's, yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, that certainly stopped the fear that everyone was going to, it meant that we could keep going and like actually have a crack at it. And when the V2 thing happened, it was like, okay, right, we don't need to get a 22 grand job now.
Yeah. Yes, because it's funny because recently I had the directors of that video on,
Yeah, I remember I saw that
which is
one.
interesting.
It was funny. I haven't seen them for a long time. The blast from the past, that was for sure when I saw that.
Yeah. And then just interested like in corporate, do you get corporate gigs that come your way that are quite useful at the
Yeah,
time?
well, you know what? Again, it's like it was at the time when that started to be a thing. I mean, unless I obviously wasn't in music before 2004, but I really think it's when it started to be a bit of a thing, brands kind of really starting to infiltrate music and to, the sort of ages of festivals being heavily branded and, you know, money being out there for that kind of thing. So it was always a little bit like, oh, should we do this? You know what I mean? Like, this is not cool. Ugh. And I remember we did something for T-Mobile in some cave in fucking Dalston, in a kebab shop in Dalston. They were doing this, yeah, and we were just like, great, like take the money. But yeah, I think that was one of the sort of cheesier ones. But again, like Rakes, no matter what people say, like people like Eddie Slimane was sort of Dior sort of creative director or designer was touched by the Rakes, said to the band, like, your album inspired me to design my collection for 2005 or 6, whenever it was, which is crazy. I remember him coming to this show in Paris and then saying to me, like, when the band were on, it's like, I really want I think Jamie knew him a little bit as well. He was like, I really want the band to create some music for my show. It's like, yeah, you know, but to actually achieve that now, to get to that, something like that's happened. I don't know. It was just crackers. And I remember the band did that, So that was a kind of a brand thing, but it was a much cooler brand thing, being asked to sort of create the music for Christian Dior catwalk, and me and Jamie went to the fashion show, which was again nuts, sitting next to Mick Jagger and whoever else. And I remember we remember afterwards going backstage to sort of like try and say hi to Eddie Slimane. I remember at one point like cutting through Karl Lagerfeld and fucking Kate Moss air kissing. It was these two like sort of upstarts from like some shitty crazy indie band. It's funny. Funny.
Yeah, yes. And then yeah, you get to the point where like fast forward into the band calling it a day. Did you see that coming?
Yeah, I think just with a lot of these things. I think that's why I still manage a band called Friendly Fires, and I think this is a prime example of why I don't manage more bands, because I think, or have done since, because I think the dynamics of bands always can get tricky. I think it's very unusual to find bands that sort of get on. Do you know what I mean? And I think touring, drinking, playing shows, being in each other's pockets all that time, I think take its toll a little bit, and I think relationships break down. And again, I think the reason why they're all quite different personalities made the fact that created the art that they did, made that record the way it was, or create great, help them create great art, in that first record for sure, and the second one to a degree. It's like, and the third, but I mean, obviously that's not sustainable. I think when you've got these personalities that clash so much, and I think it was kind of inevitable, really. I think the writing was on the wall. I think there was definitely a bit of friction within the band, and yeah, it was never going to last. When you've got those characters, it was always going to be that way. But I think my sort of overarching sort of thought about them was just like just a bunch of cool fucking dudes who were just funny, and who kind of didn't really take it seriously. And I feel like maybe I definitely pushed them a lot to sort of make it a thing. Maybe you could say. I don't know. I definitely felt like I was always like, guys, let's do this. Like really early on, let's do, let's try and put this show. Let's go down this direction. Try and get a little record going with these people, Transgressive or fucking whoever it was, Moshi Moshi. And I felt they kind of went along with it, but then obviously that then they sort of got into it and were obviously masters of their own destiny, so to speak. But I don't think they'll shoot me down for saying that. But yeah, I mean, 4 mad characters, and yeah, sometimes that doesn't necessarily lend itself to longevity in an artistic sort of environment.
Yeah, and it does feel like it's like hard to maybe navigate like the way through those early 2010s. It wasn't easy for bands to like carry on at that point. I don't know. felt
Yeah.
like the landscape changed a bit.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, because it's cycles, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And again, to your point, what Connor was talking about, I think, just how quickly trends started to move and how quickly people could communicate and get into more new things and to discover and the ways and the barriers to discovery sort of dropping, because we as we had to discover music by friends and going to record shops and finding something to then delve into something else, and it was a different way. So I think that has an effect on like how the life cycle of things and the trends of artists and bands and whatever it was. And then in the sort of early tens, it definitely happened, didn't it? Things moved much quicker, and yeah, that filter kind of fell down a little bit, didn't it? You'd
Yeah,
say.
yeah. And do you reckon you could convince them to do a re-release or catch a release next year?
Yeah, yeah. Do you know what? I think that'd be a good idea. I need to put a phone call into Jason Rackham. If he ever watches this, I'm not sure if he does, but yeah, I think it's a good idea. But it'd be a situation of getting them all. I wonder if they would be willing to get back together again and relive the old days.
Even if it was like
Maybe.
just one or two, like one shirt, Brixton Academy or something, it'd be brilliant, wouldn't
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I could see that happening to be honest, but I mean, I have to ask. Yeah, maybe.
it? Yeah, fair play. And then you mentioned the likes of Friendly Fires, and so at what point did you start working with other bands?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time, started to realize that you needed to do more things. So, I sort of ended up from doing it off my own back. I sort of from then on, I went to sort of started working with different a management company, and then went on to another management company and realized that sort of started to diversify and work with different artists and different things. And
At what point though, like we
I
just
think
focused on the
even
Rakes to
yeah,
start
pretty
with.
much. I think like when the second record came, I was definitely doing sort of managing a couple of other little things that didn't really sort of manage to sort of go anywhere really. But then I think after the second record, I actually met Friendly Fires and started working with them, and that then I had for sort of 2008, 9, 10. That was a roller coaster as well. That sort of went through the roof for a bit in the UK. Like signed to XL and
No,
stuff.
I remember, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so like that was fun. But yeah, so you realize that you had a bit more time in your hands, you could do more things. You felt if you wanted to survive as a manager, you had to have more than not bands that want to hear that or artists want to hear that, but you probably want to have a few more things on the go than just one thing. So, and being in a bigger company allowed you to do that. You had to have resources at your disposal. So yeah, I think quite soon I realized that I needed to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And how does it work? Do you say it's a management company? Do they present you with bands or do you go looking for bands?
Uh, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it can be that way. I think it's early on. It was not really through the management company that kind of came about. Those bands came about. It was just through like lawyers and people that you met and A&R people kind of tipping you off on stuff. And then yeah, of course, like when I sort of progressed through the sort of gears and sort of I worked at a really successful management company called Machine Management, and it was a really great time. And sort of through there, we were still doing so well that things would come in via the management company, to sort of manage, because it was like firing all cylinders, so many great clients. So that then you would get the value from that, the value of being part of a bigger thing. And that's still the same today. I mean, I work at Red Light Management, had my own imprint through there, but I sort of work with James, who manages Kaisers, and I think he still manages the Cribs, Strokes and Interpol. And you get there's things that come through that system as well that you might be privy to or might be able to work on. So it's interesting. It's like that's how it can work. It doesn't always work out like that. You know, you get opportunities through various avenues, through lawyers, through other A&R people, through other bands or other clients or other producers or whatever it may be. Does
Yeah,
it sound a bit murky?
yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah.
It's quite murky. It's not,
Yeah. So you got a few bands and artists that you work with at the minute, obviously.
yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot. I mean, I've done obviously sort of into a whole, I mean, whole range of music. But, before I met the Rakes, I was sort of mad into raving, And when I went to university, I sort of the height of Britpop, I guess, sort of became just like, well, I don't like that anymore. I'm into this, and but those sort of things that sort of shape you always stay with you. So so now I manage a whole raft of producers and you know DJs and still manage friendly fires and I manage a Portuguese artist called Anamora randomly, which is I live out. I mean, a whole ton of stuff. But yeah, you never. I think with the rates was I think at the time being into that being so heavily into that ingrained in that music scene as a fan or that era of music, and then being able to actually be part of something and help take it through to a point of it getting signed was actually pretty amazing. You never forget that. But it's like now it's a job. Do you know what I mean? Like you sort of draw on your influences that have helped you grow as a music lover, as a person, and I'm happy managing someone like the Rakes as I am a sort of a producer duo who make dance music for people like John Summit, for example, like who you might not know or do know or not. That I'm happily, I'm quite comfortable in all those sort of worlds really. I've done it for so long.
Yeah, yeah. And how do bands make money now, predominantly? Is it
Do you
gigs
know
or?
what? It's hard. It's hard. Do you know what? Okay, I'm quite out of that now because I don't, as I say, I don't really, apart from Friendly Fires, who been a bit, it's probably not been active um, as an operational band for a long time. And again, they existed when or came through in a time or broke in a time when it was good times to be in that world. Now I think it's really hard. I don't, as I say, I don't really know if I'm honest with you because I don't represent any bands that are kind of coming through. But primarily, of course, live is always going to be the lifeblood of it because of the way the market is now. But again, I'm not the best person to ask if I'm honest.
Yeah, fair. What about the
Because
DJs then? Or producers?
producers have I've done that. I've done a lot of that. I managed a really incredible producer called Mark Ralph for 10 years who was, funnily enough, I think he recorded the Others record back in the day before
All
I'd
right.
worked with him. He was doing that kind of stuff, but now he went on to producing and mixing and writing huge hits for people like Clean Bandit and Jax Jones and you know you name it, he did it, and so that's a different kettle of fish because you're talking
Right.
about doing deals for records, for productions, like royalties, and getting deal making really. Um, that's a bit less ego driven, bit more connection based, like labels, and managers, and songwriters, and creating sessions and cutting deals and just networking. And I like that a lot. I like that a bit more. Like I've got there's a bit less, probably a bit less stressful for managing four completely different characters who yeah with the ability, who get on and don't get on at the same time. You know what I mean? So it's a completely different dynamic. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Cheers for your time, mate. Really
no, it's
appreciate
great.
it.
It's really enjoyed it. Really great to chat to you, and looking forward to hearing some other people talk about the time because it was, as I say, it was a really cool, cool moment for
Yeah.
British music, I guess. So
We'll finish on a couple of questions and quickly. Probably should have
yeah,
briefed you on these, but
all
just I ask everyone like, was there a high point and was there anything you do differently?
right. Yeah, I think just look, you know what, I think just if I wish I could, yeah, I think have to have a bit more experience in that time when the guys did the second record, I guess, like. Um, being able to kind of to sort of step back and take a breath and kind of think, hey, we can take a bit more time on this and let's work with this person, do that, or do this, and not maybe rush it as much. You know, I think those kind of things come with experience, I suppose. So you know, I think that would have been done differently. But apart from that, none of it. Just apart from that.
What about a high point?
Yeah, look, man. I think from a band point of view, playing Brixton Academy for sure was a real high point for the Rakes, in my opinion, and for me. But I think a real high point was probably going into work and telling my boss that I was leaving because I was going to manage a band called the Rakes full time, and that he could shove his job up his ass, which was amazing.
What a finishing point.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, superb, mate.